What's going on? This is Theo Gremminger, aka the OG Fantasy, back at it. You guessed it. This is Week 7 Fantasy Football Sleepers. And I got to say, we do this every single week, and it's difficult because I don't look at players unless they're around 25% or less rostered in Yahoo leagues. So it's kind of like a fruitless endeavor because a lot of these players are not rostered at a high percentage for a reason. They either have some red flags or there's usage concerns. But last week, we had a bunch of hits. Desmond Ritter finishes as QB6. Gardner Minshew finishes as QB18. Both those guys were free. We gave them to you right here. They both had over 300 passing yards. Chuba Hubbard, who was honestly a little bit higher rostered than we usually recommend. I believe he was like 30% rostered in Yahoo leagues, maybe 32%. But I still recommended him because I believe that Miles Sanders was not going to play. Miles Sanders did not play, and Chuba Hubbard had a really good game. He had 16 PPR points. He's a great guy to go out and kind of kick the tires on and see if the Chuba Hubbard manager in your league is not really long-term on him, because I think he's going to have a number of weeks providing low-end RB2 production. I think Sanders is really, really banged up. But that was a big win for us. Curtis Samuel and Josh Downs, both on the list, both caught touchdown passes. And Kendrick Bourne, who I added on the list begrudgingly. There were several kind of weeks where it was really like difficult to kind of look at Bourne and make a bull case. But he did lead New England in receiving yards in week 5. We looked at the matchup and we said Kendrick Bourne's a guy you can use if you're in a jam. And Kendrick Bourne ends up finishing as wide receiver 10 overall. Certainly didn't think he'd finish as wide receiver 10 overall, but we'll take that W. And this week, it gets even more difficult because I have 6 teams that, much like our lineups, were unable to use those players because they're on bye weeks. So searching for these sleepers was even more difficult this week. But let's get one thing straight. You're watching a video at PlayerProfiler, okay? You're a serious fantasy football player. Bye weeks are not an excuse for losses. Injuries are not an excuse for losses. When one door closes in fantasy, another opens up. Players pop every single week, and we're going to do the best that we can to identify logical spot starts, sleepers that make sense, and some of these sleepers you really should consider stashing. Think of this as like a secondary waiver wire video. My sleepers article is dropping this week on Friday or Saturday on playerprofiler.com. Once in a while, the article drops on Thursday. But basically, look for this in article form at the end of every single week, and look for this video to drop on Thursday or Friday every single week. We've got you covered this week. Hopefully, this can be a real help to you. Let's start out at the quarterback position. Desmond Ritter. We're going to stick with Ritter until he burns us. And, I don't believe that Desmond Ritter is some exceptional talent, but he's now had back-to-back weeks of 300 yards or more passing. He's also had 30 or more pass attempts in all but one game this season. Last week against Washington, the game flow went in his direction, but he had 47 passing attempts. That would have been unheard of last year in an Arthur Smith offense quarterbacked by Marcus Mariota. So things with Ritter right now are looking more like 2021 Matt Ryan than they are 2022 Marcus Mariota. I have been a huge, huge hater on Arthur Smith and, some of the ways he's used, Kyle Pitts and Drake London at times during their careers. But lately, those guys are both trending up. Drake London was a guy that I circled on the 2-minute drill, my fantasy takeaways from last week. Look for that video right here where you're finding this one. Drake London, I think, is a mid wide receiver 2 moving forward and trending up. He's wide receiver 30 right now, but I think when we get back in, a month, we're going to be talking about how Drake London's already like wide receiver 20, wide receiver 18. I think that's where he's heading. Obviously, Bijan Robinson is a threat out of the backfield. And then you have the two-headed monster right now of a rejuvenated Kyle Pitts. And guess what? Kyle Pitts is tight end 12 now on the season in PPR. And Jonnu Smith, it's like one of the wildest players right now, is tight end 9 in PPR. So Ritter has some weapons that he's utilizing. We're going to continue to use Ritter. I have a couple of spots where I'm begrudgingly putting Ritter into the lineup because I'm jammed at certain spots with either injuries or with just scrambling with these buys. This week is a difficult one. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers are a strong defense. They also are coming off of a loss and are looking to win this week in a big bounce back spot against these Atlanta Falcons. The last time that we saw the Bucs in an NFC South game, the Bucs beat the New Orleans Saints in a pretty convincing fashion. They have a chance to play Atlanta this week and get another big NFC South win. So this is a difficult matchup, but I think that based on the options available to us, let's keep going with Ritter. Another quarterback you can use, and I'm using this quarterback in a super flex league or two, and that's Josh Dobbs. Dobbs is quarterback 19 on the season, benefited from a strong rushing production. That's really kind of carried him. The weapons that he has are solid right now. Hollywood Brown is playing great football. You also have Trey McBride, who, flashed last week. And you also have, obviously, Michael Wilson, who's his wide receiver 2, who bounced back a little bit last week. So Wilson isn't really smashing, but we think the talent and the profile are there. Dobbs has a difficult matchup this week with the Seattle Seahawks on the road, but Arizona should be in a positive game script for much of the game. So Josh Dobbs, if you're in a pinch this week, like many of us are, consider using him, especially in your Superflex lineups. Another player that you're going to want to get in your Superflex lineups, and this is all dependent on Daniel Jones, but I don't think Daniel Jones is going to play this week. It sounds like Jones, there's not a whole lot of optimism for him suiting up this week with that neck injury. So I'm looking at Tyrod Taylor, and Tyrod Taylor is available, obviously, in 98% of Yahoo leagues. He's free. He was unimpressive last week. The Giants hung with Buffalo and had chances to win that game. Taylor only had 200 passing yards and 24 rushing yards, which was actually very disappointing. Taylor in the past has been a guy that we could kind of rely on to have the sort of rushing production that like a Dobbs had this year. That really wasn't there. But the thing that we like about this is he's going up against the Washington Commanders. The Commanders have now conceded 5 straight 300-yard passing performances. This is the leaky wheel defense. This is the defense that we target. This is the defense that made Desmond Ritter QB6 overall on the week. So we don't love Taylor, but we certainly love the matchup. And this is a game that the Giants very much want to win. I think they're going to have to open things up a little bit offensively. You also have Darren Waller. You have Saquon Barkley, both healthy, both out on the field this week. And we're going to talk about some of those New York Giants wide receivers when we discuss that position. Now we're going to pivot over to the running back position. And this is really, really thin. Like, I struggled to come up with some names here, but I know that a lot of you play in very, very deep formats. So I'm going to provide 2 super deep options to go along with 3 kind of obvious ones, but none of these are too exciting this week. This is not a fun week to find sleeper running backs. I'm going to start out with Latavius Murray. Lat Murray was a guy I talked about in my waiver wire video. Again, you can find my waiver wire video every single week right here on Player Profiler YouTube. That's a fun one that I like to drop. I also drop the waiver wire column on playerprofiler.com. That's one you should definitely check out. Very deep. It's one of the deepest waiver wire columns available. We write it for pretty much any format you play. You're going to find names that are you're able to add from my waiver wire column. And I think that there's a lot of waiver wire columns out there where they're kind of unrealistic with how regular leagues have guys, available to them. So definitely check out my video, check out my article. But for now, Lat Murray is a sleeper. He should get the short yardage and red zone opportunities, and this is a game Buffalo should win. They're on the road in New England, but New England is absolutely reeling. Murray had an uptick in usage last week. He had also an interesting routes run disparity with James Cook. We think of James Cook as this pass catching back, but the routes run versus Lat Murray were only 15-13 in Cook's favor. So it was a real split on the routes run, and Murray had the most rushing yards he's had all season long. He also, and James Cook also for that matter, both of these running backs see a slight tick up because of the neck injury to Damian Harris. So it goes from a James Cook getting the majority of the work with Murray and Harris working in to James Cook getting the majority of the work, but Lat Murray doing everything he can to make this a 50-50 split. James Cook is definitely the running back you want in Buffalo. I think James Cook is a low-end RB2, high-end RB3. But in weeks like this, if you're really desperate, I think Lat Murray is going to get 12 touches this week. Let's say 10 plus touches every week for the next like near future. And Buffalo is third in the NFL with 28.8 points per game. So having access to touches in this high quality of an offense when we're in a jam is a better way of going about things than using like some of these dart throws I'm going to talk about coming up. And not quite a dart throw, but definitely a lot less exciting than when I wrote my waiver wire column is Craig Reynolds. Craig Reynolds has been banged up this week. He has a questionable tag. So if you're watching this video on Saturday or Sunday morning, definitely double check and see if Craig Reynolds is playing this week. But if he does play, he's going to get some touches. Jahmyr Gibbs looks set to return. And with David Montgomery missing, Jahmyr Gibbs should get the lion's share. You guys get it? Lion's share? The lion's share of Detroit's touches. But Reynolds should mix in for, 10 or so carries. There's a chance that Craig Reynolds gets goal line work in this matchup, and Reynolds could fall into the end zone. It's Baltimore Ravens, which makes the entire Detroit offense just a little harder to trust. Like, I believe in Ben Johnson. I think Jared Goff is playing extremely well, but that Baltimore defense can get to people sometimes. So this is actually one of the best games of the week between Baltimore and Detroit. And look for Craig Reynolds, if he plays, to be the change-up back and also the goal line back, and probably get some short yardage work with Jahmyr Gibbs handling the high-value touches. If you're really only use Reynolds if you're really, really desperate this week. Understand what you're trying to get here. If I'm using Latavius Murray or Craig Reynolds, then I'm looking at a guy who can get me 10 points, maybe 12 points, and I'm going to be happy with that. Keon Ingram, second year back. Last week, Amari DiMercato was a guy that a lot of fantasy managers were banking on to have a good deal of work. It turned out to be Keon Ingram, a second-year running back out of Texas, dominating Arizona's RB touches. And to say he dominated the touches, that's true, but the production certainly wasn't there. He had 40 rushing yards, and he had 2 receptions. This is not a backfield we want to use with James Conner out unless we're really desperate. But Keon Ingram is sitting there. He's available in 75% of Yahoo leagues, and he could see 12 to 15 touches again this week. So I don't think that the book has been completely written. I think if I have Keon Ingram, unless I'm really desperate, he's on my bench just to see if he sees like an uptick this week, because I am worried that there could be a changing where like Damian Williams sees a little more work and Amari DiMercato maybe sees a little more opportunity for touches than he did last week. But more likely than not, it's Keon Ingram handling the majority of the Arizona running back touches. I don't think that's worth a whole lot, but if you're in a complete jam and you have to use an Arizona running back, it's definitely Ingram, but he's more of a stash than a plug and play. These next 2 names, if you're in an FFPC league, or you're in an NFFC league, or you're in a very deep format and you need somebody who you can plug in and just plug and pray and hope for usage, these two options are interesting. We had a lot of love for Zach Evans this week. Zach Evans was a guy that I saw fantasy managers spending an absolute ton of fab on. And I think it makes some sense because I think he's logically the next man in for the Los Angeles Rams. And we liked Zach Evans when he was at Ole Miss. But Zach Evans getting a huge amount of touches and a significant amount of snaps versus the other running backs is still somewhat hopeful. He was unable to beat out Ronnie Rivers at any point this season. And Zach Evans only has 4 carries on the entire year. And when Sean McVay was asked about Zach Evans, he was somewhat dismissive, if not, not really brushing him off, but not really like a slam dunk. Yeah, Zach's our guy. So a lot of people talked about Royce Freeman. And Royce Freeman, he was a guy who's been there. He's on the practice squad, at least for a few weeks. But my sleeper option is Myles Gaskin. Myles Gaskin was most recently with the Minnesota Vikings, so he has familiarity with the Sean McVay system because Minnesota's head coach is Kevin O'Connell, a former McVay assistant. Gaskin has had fantasy success in the past. He's not a very good player, but he had 49 catches in 2021. He was an RB2 for a lot of that season. He can be a sneaky play for fantasy managers if Zach Evans and Royce Freeman fail to grab any touches here. I really don't want to use any of these guys, but it looks like Zach Evans could miss until week 11, and Ronnie Rivers is going to miss some time as well. They also added Darrell Henderson, who's had some success with McVay, but was unattached to any team as of last week. So Henderson's there, Freeman's there, Evans is there. I'm going to throw my dart at Myles Gaskin. I would encourage you, if you have an open roster spot, to grab Gaskin or Henderson or Freeman for that matter, just in case Zach Evans can't run with it. These kind of guys could be a waiver wire ad in a few days, where a lot of waiver wire sites are talking about like, hey, add Myles Gaskin, and you can get ahead of your league mates and add him for 0% if your league allows that, or a $1 bid if your league doesn't. It's worth taking a shot because we have seen a number of running backs have fantasy success under Sean McVay. We just saw Kyron Williams rush for 158 yards. And this offense is trending up with Puka Nacua and obviously the return of Cooper Kupp and a rejuvenated Matt Stafford. Another deeper option, and this one is not really me throwing a dart because we saw him play last week. Roschon Johnson is out. Roschon Johnson can't get over the concussion symptoms. So Roschon is out, and it should be Deonta Foreman getting the majority of the carries, but Darrington Evans is also there. And last week he had 9 carries and he caught 2 passes, 11 touches. He'll see a similar workload this week. Let's pivot over to the wide receiver position. I talked about Kendrick Bourne as a player who hit for me last week on my waiver wire column and this video. And fantasy managers didn't run and scoop him up. He's available still in 77% of Yahoo leagues. Again, he's coming off of a 10-catch, 89-yard performance in week 6. Bourne has had 44 targets on the season, and he's by far the most reliable New England pass-catching weapon. Last week, no other New England Patriots wide receiver had more than 3 targets or 1 catch. It's completely gross right now. It's Kendrick Bourne. He's going to see the targets. This is Buffalo. It's a very difficult matchup for the New England offense. But in terms of opportunities, I would be surprised if Kendrick Bourne doesn't see at least 6 targets. And there's a chance he could get a similar target total as he had last week, which was 11. So Kendrick Bourne, he's had 11 targets twice this season, 44 targets on the season. He's probably the best bet among these sleepers, even though you're definitely buying into a floor. Another floor play option, Wan'Dale Robinson. Robinson has caught 18 passes in the last 3 weeks. Last week had a season high 8 catches, season high 8 targets. There's always a threat that New England gives him maybe 1 or 2 rushing opportunities, design runs. There's not a whole lot of ceiling there, but I actually think Wan'Dale Robinson, if he's still available in your league, is one that you want to add, even if you're not going to stream him, because I think that the 8 targets and the uptick he saw last week could be a trend. I think this is an uptick trend, and I think Wan'Dale Robinson is going to have a higher weekly floor now than he did a few weeks ago. Remember, this is a player that missed some time with injury. He's back. He's healthy. We're rolling with Wan'Dale Robinson again this week if we're in a jam. Michael Wilson. Michael Wilson had 162 combined yards in week 3 and 4. In week 5, he fell completely flat. But last week, he bounced back, 62-yard performance. He's the number 2 target in Arizona to Hollywood Brown. We talked about Josh Dobbs. We've talked about Keon Ingram. I hate recommending so many Cardinals, but I do think they're going to be in a positive game script. And he should also be rostered in more leagues. Like right now, Wilson's available in 81% of Yahoo leagues. When Kyler Murray comes back, look for Wilson to see an uptick. Jaden Reed. Jaden Reed's available in 83% of Yahoo leagues, coming off of his worst performance of the season. Then Green Bay had a bye week. But a lot of NFL teams will self-scout when they have bye weeks. And Jaden Reed, talking about a day 2 pick, he's flashed this year. He's got speed. He might see more usage. There might be like Green Bay saying we want to get Jaden Reed more involved. So I want to stash him right now and see where it goes so I don't have to use waiver wire money on him next week. See if he's available in your league. See if you can't add him for $1 or a 0% fab if your league allows it. Let's talk about the other 2 Giants wide receivers, Darius Slayton, Jalen Hyatt. These are more like swing for the fences, chasing yardage type players than Wan'Dale Robinson. Wan'Dale Robinson also is rostered in more leagues than these guys. Wan'Dale is up to 23% rostered on Yahoo, where Darius Slayton and Jalen Hyatt are like 4 and 5% rostered guys. Hyatt saw an uptick in usage last week, and he's got speed to burn. I kind of like stashing Hyatt to see if his usage starts getting even greater than we saw last week. And Slayton has led New York in targets a few times. Completely boring player, doesn't have a touchdown catch this season. But, this is, again, a matchup we want to chase. Washington has allowed 5 300 passing yard performances in a row. And 1 or 2 of these Giants wide receivers is going to be above their league average. If there's some consolidation in their usage, they could be a useful player to use this week. Again, 6 teams are on a bye, so my options are not great. We're not quite throwing darts, but it feels dart throwy when I'm talking about guys like Slayton. The tight end position is actually very exciting. I have only 3 names, but all of these players are like dynasty focused, exciting young talents with high draft capital. In fact, all 3 of these players were second round draft picks in the NFL draft. The first one is, and you could actually pick the first 2 guys kind of stand out here. Luke Musgrave is a guy that I talk about pretty much every single week in one of these columns and also my videos. This is a guy that I believe in the talent. I believe in his profile. Second round pick out of Oregon State. Big time athlete. He was all state in 4 sports in high school, like a legendary athlete. And he's coming off of a 7 target, 6 catch performance in week 5. Musgrave gets a significant matchup boost this week as Green Bay is set to face off against Denver. Denver is a bottom 3 pass defense, and they're one of the worst defenses in the league against the tight end position. So Musgrave's coming off of a big performance, not a big performance in terms of yardage, but a big performance in terms of targets. 7 targets for a tight end, we will take that. 6 catches for a tight end, we will absolutely take that. And now he has an opportunity against a leaky defensive secondary to maybe get loose on a big one. There are far worse players to throw darts out than Musgrave. Just as a quick note, Musgrave is rostered in 26% of Yahoo leagues, so he's slightly over our threshold, but he's close enough that I wanted to include him. Michael Mayer is still available in 80% of Yahoo leagues, and I bet you when we get to like Sunday and you're half an hour till game time, more and more managers will say, oh, I see Michael Mayer, available. I'm going to add him last minute. So I think his roster percentage is going to go up in the next 36 hours. He was a very popular waiver wire addition this week in high stakes. He had a 5-catch, 75-yard performance. He was on the field in 57 of Vegas's 70 snaps, and he dominated routes run versus Austin Hooper. This was, again, a second-round draft pick out of Notre Dame, and I think he could see advantageous weekly matchups because defenses have to account for the wide receiver pair of Devontae Adams and Jacoby Myers, and also high-volume running back Josh Jacobs. Chicago is the 9th worst defense in the league against opposing tight ends. The last tight end, Trey McBride. McBride had his best game of the season. He finished with 4 catches for 62 yards. This was the 2021 second-round pick out of Colorado State. And he's played behind Zach Ertz for weeks, but he finally outsnapped him and he outproduced him in week 6. I don't know what to make of this. I think this could be a trend. I think there's also a chance that Zach Ertz gets traded to a contender and Arizona just rolls with Trey McBride. I hate recommending this many Arizona Cardinals, but there's a lot of Cardinals available, and we're going to try to identify the ones that can score some points and help our fantasy football teams. Again, I'm Theo Gremminger. You can find me on Twitter at the OG Fantasy. You can find my Sleepers article, as well as my waiver wire article and 2-minute drill articles on PlayerProfiler.com. Those drop on Mondays, Tuesdays, and then the sleeper one towards the end of the week. Look for all of my videos here at PlayerProfiler.com and check out First Class Fantasy, Press Coverage, the Sonic Truth Dynasty podcast, and all of the other great podcasts we have at Player Profiler. We got you covered all season long. Let's win this week. Let's win some money this year, and let's win some titles.